Just still waiting for Mr. Johnson to get connected here. He's joining in the waiting room and just taking a few minutes to get him connected. So. All right, I think we have everyone with us. We'll get started here. And I didn't get a chance to talk to Robin, but this is a workshop session for the school board. There's not any business to be taken care of. It's just discussion, gathering information and asking questions. And the two items that we can discuss tonight is the bond refinance option and the capital projects levy. And with that said, I will turn it over to Chairperson Robin and let her run the meeting. If she can hear me.
No, I am here. And I don't have, I raced home really quick. So there was the, which item was first? There was only the agenda I saw just had the two items. Which one was the first one? The refinancing or the levy?
The refinance is the first item on the agenda. And I can, Craig, you can let me know if there's something you want me to put up, share on the screen for everyone.
Sure. Do you want to put that outline up?
Okay. Can everyone see that okay?
Yep.
All right. So thanks for having me here tonight. I have one of my colleagues, Haley Foucault, is with us as well. And we wanted to chat a little bit about the two items on your agenda for tonight. I'm Greg Crow with Ellers, been your financial advisor for many years. It's been a couple of years since I've been up in the district. I think the last time was when we refinanced the last bond issue. So, or maybe when we did the LTFM bond, but regardless, it's always nice to connect. I wish it was in person, but I guess that goes without saying these days. So, what we've prepared is a refunding bond outline, and this is something we've been talking with Jeff and Crystal about for a few years, thinking about what the opportunities are going forward and how the district can sort of best take advantage of those opportunities. The word refunding really just means refinancing. And so that's kind of what we're talking about, is talking about refinancing the 2011 bonds that were issued to pay off your capital loan when the state did the interest forgiveness on those loans. So there's a little bit of background on this outline and then some specific calculations. We have seen a bit of a fluctuation in the interest rate market, which will affect the calculation for potential savings, just like when you refinance your house. Obviously, your savings in doing that refinancing will depend on interest rates at the time that you actually do the refinancing. And so we had talked to Cheryl and Jeff, or Crystal and Jeff, about 2 or 3 weeks ago with an update that kind of made it more appealing to move ahead sooner rather than later, but things have changed in the last couple of weeks. So let's just walk through the outline. Up in italics is a little bit of background that when you sell bonds, you designate at the time that you sell them when they can be prepaid without a penalty. And that's called the call date. And basically, typically it's 8 to 10 years. In 2011, it was closer to 10 years. Now the standard is more like 8 years, because if you have a shorter call date, investors generally charge you a higher interest rate for your loan because they want to know that they can hold the bonds and earn interest on them for a certain amount of time. And that 8 to 10 year threshold is where we aren't seeing penalties now in terms of higher interest rates to have that prepayment option. So the call date on your 2011 bonds is February 1st, 2022. What that means is you can refund or refinance the bonds sometime between now and then to reduce debt service payments, and that will in turn reduce tax levies. The idea of refinancing is not to provide additional funds for project costs or spending. It's simply to reduce taxes, and there's a benefit to your taxpayers. And what we'll talk about in the second agenda item is how you can potentially help use the refunding to provide you with additional funding. There are a lot of federal and state laws that come into play when you refinance bonds. So we're kind of trying to give you a sense of what those are. As I mentioned, the 2011 bonds refunded your outstanding capital loan. They were a 25-year term bond. You can go up to 30. Most bonds are 20 to 25 years for school districts in Minnesota. There are 15 years of payments remaining. So when we talk about refinancing, at this point, we're not talking about changing that, shortening or lengthening the term of the bond, simply refinancing for interest savings. The third bullet point mentions that these bonds were issued as capital appreciation bonds. The reason for that was we wanted to keep the tax rate as low as possible relative to the maximum effort tax rate that was in place at the time of the refinancing. So there were no payments, either principal or interest, for the first 10 years of the bond. And now the district has started paying off principal as well as accrued interest. So right now there's about $11.9 million of principal remaining to be paid and accrued interest from those first 10 years. The original interest rate on the 2011 bonds was 4.33%. And as you're probably aware, interest rates have been pretty low recently. And so we anticipate that you'll be able to refinance the bonds for lower than that 4.33% interest rates. So as I mentioned, there's a call date on the bonds, and you can't prepay them before that call date. So most refundings lately have come within 90 days of that call date. And that's called a current refunding. But you do have the option of doing a refinancing right now or anytime up until the 90 days before the call date, called an advance refunding. And there are extra complications and considerations on an advance refunding, but it does allow you to lock in rates before you would be able to if you wait to do a current refund. There are some, as I mentioned, complications and differences between an advance refunding and a current refunding, because basically what you're doing with an advance refunding is selling a new bond in the amount needed to pay off the old bond and then putting it in an escrow account until you reach the call date. And the escrow account where that money sits is kind of inefficient in that you're paying higher interest rate on the new bond than you're earning in interest earnings on that escrow account. So the escrow account, and that's called negative arbitrage. So typically you have to borrow a little more than your outstanding principal and interest to make sure you have sufficient funds at the time of the call date to pay off the old bond. And the other issue that creates differences is that after Congress acted in 2017 on the tax reform bill, in addition to all the kind of heavily publicized changes about income tax and things like that, they also eliminated the ability of municipal issuers to enter into advance refundings on a tax exempt basis. So if you moved ahead now, more than 90 days from that February call date, you would have to issue the new bonds as taxable bonds, which do carry a slightly higher interest rate. And so that's a consideration as well as you think about whether to move ahead now or to wait. We know that for those two reasons, the negative arbitrage and the taxable rates, the closer you are to the call date, the closer the savings from the advance refunding will be compared with the current refunding. And we also know that if rates don't change, you'll always save more at the time of current refunding than you will in an advance refund. So we describe a current refunding in option 2, which is the simplest form of refunding, lowest interest issuance costs, and you can issue tax exempt bonds in order to affect the refunding. But as I mentioned, it has to be within 90 days of the call date, which is in early November. So Jeff, if you could scroll up, we can look at the estimates for options 1 and 2 at the bottom of that page. So right now we're estimating that bonds that are sold in May of 2021, so this is option 1 as an advance refunding, at today's interest rates. So we're estimating about 2.15% on a taxable basis would generate savings of present value savings of $1.9 million. And there's a typo there that 1.7 should be 1.9. The 1.7 is the present value of the savings. So roughly 1.9 million of savings, or $140,000 a year of levy reduction during the remaining life of the bonds compared to what your taxpayers are paying now. The other option, the current refunding, we would sell the bonds in October, and based on today's interest rates, we're estimating a true interest cost of 1.85% and estimated total savings of 2.4 million, or about $170,000 to $175,000 a year. So obviously, if rates stay the same, it would be a no-brainer, and you would not move ahead with the refinancing now. But we know that rates will change. They might go up, they might go down, but they're unlikely to be exactly the same as they are now. So we perform what's called a sensitivity analysis, which shows, compared to what you could save now, how much would you save on a current refunding if interest rates moved up or down between now and then. And then we calculate a break even. And for this bond issue, the break even point is 0.41%. That is, interest rates could increase by up to 0.41% on a tax exempt refunding, and you would still save the same amount as if you locked in today's rates now. So let's look at the next page, which is a little bit more detail on the sensitivity analysis. So as I mentioned at the top, that's where we lay out the savings from the advance refunding. That's $1,944,000. That's what we're estimating you would save if you moved ahead right now. And there's a calculation in there that's present value savings as a percent of the present value of the refunded debt. And in Minnesota, that number has to be 3% or higher for you to be permitted to move ahead with the refunding. So that's Minnesota's state law kind of minimum amount of savings you have to get. And obviously at almost 12%, this is significantly higher than that. So it's definitely a good candidate for refunding. And the question is, do you want to move ahead now or move ahead this fall? So the next thing we do is we calculate the present value as of November this year of that 1.9 million savings, and that's 1,663,000. So about $1.7 million of present value savings. Then in the next box down below, the first couple of lines are showing that 2.4 million of future value of savings on the current refunding. And that's a present value of 2 million as of November 15th. So that's what we want to compare. So you can see in the chart below, if rates went down by 1%, which is unlikely, but I guess anything's possible, the savings would increase to $3.1 million. And then if you go down that scale, you hit the 0 point, and that's the 2 million of savings on present value basis that we're estimating using current rates. And then if you go all the way to the bottom, if rates increase by a full percentage point between now and when the bonds are sold in October, you'd save 1.1 million. So that break even of right around 0.4 is where rates would increase. And you see that at 0.4, it's 1,669,000. So at that point, you're basically, it's a wash between locking in today's rates and moving ahead in the fall instead. And so the bottom line is you are very likely, unless something really crazy happens to interest rates, to save a significant amount of money on this refunding for your taxpayers. On this range between $1 million and $3 million, probably in all likelihood, somewhere in that 1.5, 1.6 million to $2.3 million worth of savings. So that's going to be a great result for your taxpayers. And so the question is, do you want to move ahead now or not? And as I mentioned, interest rates have increased, and actually taxable rates have increased faster than tax exempt rates. So when we looked at this 3 weeks ago, the break-even point was 0.2%, meaning if rates went up more than 0.2%, it would pay to lock in rates. We obviously can't lock in last week's rates or 2 weeks ago's rates now. And so the savings dropped fairly dramatically on the taxable advance refunding and not as much on the tax exempt refund. So we've talked a little bit with Jeff and Crystal about potentially holding off now. And actually this week, taxable rates have gone up a little further, and tax exempt rates have actually decreased by about 0.5% or so. The break even would look a little bit bigger if we reran it with today's rates versus last week's interest rates. So we really think you're in more of a wait and see mode, knowing that you're going to save something. But for example, unless taxable rates drop substantially, it probably makes a lot of sense right now to wait until October and move ahead with the tax exempt refinancing. And one option that you do potentially have is you can pass what's called a parameters resolution. And you could set a resolution target that said, we will move ahead with the taxable refinancing sometime between now and October if the savings exceeds $2 million or $2.2 million or something. And we wouldn't sell those bonds or bring those bonds to market until we anticipated the savings would be greater than that. But given what we're showing for savings on current refunding, it might not even be necessary to do that and just wait instead. We obviously, over the life of this bond, for the last 10 years, we've sent updates every 6 months to the school district explaining what the market is like and whether there are potential for savings. We've probably done that every 2 months since the middle of last summer when we really started pestering Jeff and Crystal with updates, but we wanted to stay on top of it. And actually, since last summer, the savings has gotten even better. And so it probably makes sense to do monthly or every other month updates. And if sometime in the next 4 to 6 months, it looks like it would make sense to lock in rates, you certainly could do that. But at this time, we're thinking it makes a lot of sense to wait until October to do the bond sale. So we would have the board act at the September meeting to call for the sale, sell the bonds in October, and then the district would receive the proceeds in November and use those proceeds to pay off those old 2011 bonds on February 1st of 2022. So that's kind of where we're at. And then, the next agenda item is interrelated in that we want to talk about what opportunity you have to talk to your voters about replacing some of this levy with a different levy, but I'm happy to answer any questions right now about the refinancing process, if you want to pause at this point and do that. Well, it was either super well explained or nobody knows what I'm talking.
I think we have a question here.
Sure.
I got a question. I'm not on camera, so you can't see the quizzical look on my face because a lot of that went over my head. But my take on it is that the earliest you could refund the tax exempt ones and get that tax exempt status would be early August. Does that make sense from the 90 days that you're talking about?
No, it's 90 days prior to the call date of February 1st of 2022. So the bonds have to be closed. They have to close after November 3rd. And so usually it takes about 3 weeks to close after the sale and about a month between the authorization of the issuance to the sale to get the official statement, rating call, kind of the mechanics of taking the bonds to market done. So that's why I was suggesting that the board could call in September for the bond sale, sell the bonds in October within 3 weeks of November 3rd or 4th or so. And then we would close on the bonds in that first week in November. And you could actually call for the sale in August or, I mean, earlier in the summer. If you knew you were going to wait, we could do that resolution anytime, July, August, September, but we wouldn't be able to execute the sale until 3 to 4 weeks prior to November 3rd.
And the applicable interest rate is on the date of close. Is that what I'm hearing?
No, the interest rate is locked in on the day of sale. And so when we usually do the bond sale on the day of a board meeting, because we'll take bids in the morning and then bring the bids to the board for approval of the low bid at the meeting that evening. So that's why I say at your October board meeting, that's when we would accept bids in the morning. And, there's no, unlike quality of contractors where you might pick a non-low bid for whatever reason with a roof or something, when you're getting money, every dollar is the same. There's no difference. There's no difference in quality. So we take the lowest interest rate and lock that in at the board meeting on the day of sale in October.
Okay, and as long as I've got the mic, I'll keep talking, but the notion of putting executing like you would a trade at a certain value, for instance, where you suggested, okay, if it drops 1%, execute the trade or at least initiate that process. We could do that quickly enough that my concern with that is that it doesn't, do we need that level of automation on it? Because you don't know what the tenor of the times are going to be. I mean, is the market tanking, for instance, because there's another COVID scare or something like that? And your bonds, your interest rates are now more desirable. Do you let them run for a little bit on that? As opposed to just saying, oh, go for it. We'll take what we got and leave it at that.
Yeah, I mean, once you hit that 90-day window, you want to move ahead at that point. Because if you wait, you'll pay that payment that it's actually, you're calling it on 2022, but the 2023 payment, you'll pay a higher interest rate on that first payment that you're not able to call then. So, and typically we do it as soon as we can in October to lock in the rate. And if rates weren't good, we could wait until November to do the sale and close in December. But you also have to notify the current bondholders of your intent to call more than 30 days prior to the call date. And so that typically has to happen in December. So you've got really a short window to do the tax exempt refunding. And so typically we don't do a parameters for the purpose of waiting for a certain amount of savings. We sometimes do parameters resolutions in those cases, but it's not for the purpose of timing the sale. It's more for the convenience of the board. Or for example, we have boards that meet on Columbus Day and the markets aren't open on Columbus Day. So we have to do the sale on like the Thursday beforehand. And then there's a parameters resolution that's just more put in place to authorize the issuance, even though the board isn't meeting on the day of the sale.
Okay, and last question, then I'll turn it over to whoever wants it, but you're suggesting, and you're the most well-versed person on this Zoom call, to make that throw that thought out, okay, let's just wait and see what happens. And I appreciate that. And I think that, that's sort of my thinking on it, but could you just occupy the devil's advocate role for about 30 seconds and try to talk me into doing it right now? What would be the reasons for doing that?
If you thought rates were going to increase significantly, you'd want to lock in today's rates. That's the reason to move ahead. And that's where I say we don't even need a parameters to look at what the market is like. If the bottom dropped out of taxable rates in a month, we could rerun this. We will rerun this analysis and say, you know what, probably makes sense to jump on it right now. And that was the conversation we were having last month with Jeff and Crystal was taxable and tax exempt rates are typically 0.5% apart, which makes it harder to lock these in because of that, just the nature of that differential. But for market reasons in January, it had squeezed together to where that sensitivity got relatively small. And that's why we said, you know what, you might want to consider moving ahead at this point. And then this week or last week, rates popped up again on taxable bonds. And so, with it's pretty difficult. It's not like you can go into the stock market and buy or sell in the same day. To go through the process is going to take a month and some board meetings to get there. So we can't, it's pretty hard to look at interest rates on even a 1 week period and say, okay, now it's the time to jump on. So in a period of volatility, it's also, you could hit a bad day if you decided to move ahead. And so that's what, and we've got a little volatility right now.
That's why I stay out of the casino.
Some people call the stock market a casino too, so.
Yeah. But in most likely, unless something drastic happens, we're going to seriously look at refinancing this fall.
Yeah,
that October.
Yeah, I'd say there's a 99% chance that you'll want to move ahead with it this fall.
So I think we should just kind of have that mind frame, and then if something happens in the meantime, I mean, like you said, you'd be letting us know more periodically if something does change, and so we can always adjust if we have to. Something that taxable interest rate does something weird that would benefit.
Right. Yeah, I mean, and keep that 4.3% number in mind right now. That's what you're paying right now, and right now, tax exempt rates that we ran on this were 1.85%. So even if rates go up between now and then, you're, like I said, yeah, like you referenced, unless something drastic happens, you're going to get better than 4.33% when you go to refinance this fall.
So if I understand this right,
sorry, go ahead.
If I understand this right, so we had a 25-year bond and we hadn't really been paying anything on it for the last 10 years. We've just started paying on it. So we went from a capital appreciation bonds and we're looking at doing a state capital loan.
No, you paid off the capital loan with the capital appreciation bond. And this, the new bond will be, it's called a serial bond, but it's really just a regular bond, if you wanted to say regular bond, because it will have regular principal and interest payments for 15 years with no situation where you're not making a payment. So,
Okay, but we'll be paying on it as opposed to the last one where we didn't do anything.
right,
Okay.
right.
So basically, we were looking at refinancing the bond or refunding it this fall. And if something changes where it would be advantageous to do it sooner, we'll take those steps.
Forgive me again, I see everywhere it's where it says the savings per year. And it's probably in here, but I haven't found it. How much are we going to be paying out per year?
So, well, this is net savings.
Yep.
Yep. So after cost of issuance, and we're estimating cost of issuance at about $100,000 for everything for the 11 million. So that's our fee, the bond attorney fee, rating agency fee, county certificates. In the case of an advance refunding, you also have to have CPA verification, a trustee, and an escrow for the time that the bonds sit until they can be used to pay off the old loan.
Yeah, but I guess my question is, like, we haven't been really paying anything for 10 years. So how much are we now going to be paying per year roughly? Or is this going to add $100,000, $200,000?
I see what I'm sorry. Let me. So you right now are paying about 1.1 million. I don't know, Jeff, can I share my screen at all?
I think I can get you
That's
that.
disabled.
All right, go ahead and try.
Okay. Get the right sheet up here. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Can you see something with blueprint on it? That says Lake of the Woods at the top.
Yep, we can see it now.
And so this right here in this column, can you see those numbers about 1.1 to 1.2 million? That's the debt service that's being paid right now by the district. And then this is the new debt service on the new bonds, and estimated savings of about $170,000 to $175,000 a year. So you are paying over $1 million a year right now. Now that you're into the repayment period.
And when did we start paying on the debt service?
The first.
Like, I guess it's not terribly important. I guess where I'm going with this is we're about to incur a fairly large yearly debt. Is that correct?
No. So if you go, let me pull up another sheet here that will show. I see what you're asking, but no, your total debt service already includes all of this. And because the zero payments were in place because you had other bonds that were outstanding and those are paid off now. So they sort of just replaced each other. Okay. So this has sort of been your baseline principal and interest payments for a little while. So all we're doing now is replacing that that 1.1 million with a new smaller debt service payment. See if I can share this. Yeah, so you had, it's not letting me, I don't know how to switch between these two, but you had 2012 and 2013 bonds that were, let's see, maybe if I stop Stop share. Try this other screen. Okay, how about this? Can you see something that says refunding 1, refunding 2, refunding 3 at the top?
Yep.
Okay, so you can see that you've had these, over in this column, total P&I, so this goes back to 2018, and we could go a little further. You've had these $1 million plus payments, but most of it was in the 2012 and 2013 bonds in these payments. And this is when you were not paying anything on the 2011 bonds. So it really is just starting now that you're paying on the 2011 bonds. And so this was the final payment was for taxes payable 21 on the 2012 bonds. And you can see that the 2011 bond payments jump up a lot there. So the bottom line is for many years, you've consistently had $1 million plus of debt service payments, but you weren't paying on the 2011, you were only paying for the most part on the 12 and the 13 bonds. And then when those are paid off now, the payments on the 2011 start and are significant, but now we can refinance those and reduce those payments. Is that what you were looking for?
Yep, that was exactly what I was looking for.
Okay.
And that makes sense. So it was well timed with whoever planned that, huh?
Yeah, well, I think that was how it was originally set up, why we had the cab, because you can technically carry those no interest payments as long as you want. I mean, the further you get, the more interest accumulates, but the goal was to keep the payments off until the 12 and 13 bonds were paid off. So it was designed that way, and the call date fit in there at 10 years to then have the opportunity to refinance. We were looking out for you. Even didn't join Ellers till 2012, so I can't take credit.
Any other questions? Should we move on to the next item?
Okay, yeah. So next up is the levy discussion.
Greg, do you want to stay as host and share your screen, or do you want to give me the host back and I can put up the
Yeah, I can share this.
preliminary stuff that you sent?
So the next, as we've talked with Jeff and Cheryl, and we've said that we've talked about the idea that if you have needs, it would make the most sense to plan this refunding in a way that met those needs or helped you meet those needs. And one thing that we always look at when we look at refundings is if you need to incur additional debt, is there a way that we can structure the new refunding bonds in a way that might allow you to do that, whether it's voter approved or board approved debt? And as we talked, Jeff and Cheryl talked a little bit more about the idea that the operating budget could potentially use some additional funding. And so there is a funding source called the capital project levy, which is funds, some people refer to it as a technology levy, but can be used for technology staff, or really anything that you use your operating capital revenue for, building repairs. And unlike a bond where you borrow $2 million, and if you can get an interest-free loan, you pay $200,000 a year for 10 years to pay it off, for example. unlike a bond where you have upfront money and pay it off over time, a capital project levy gives you annual funds that you can disperse over time as you incur costs. So if you don't have a big project or a new school building or something to build, but you do have ongoing needs, a capital project levy is a good alternative for that. And the other thing is that capital project levy is levied on the same tax base as your bond payments. And we had talked about whether an operating referendum would make sense, but that's taxed on referendum market value, which excludes seasonal, recreational, and cabin and ag properties. And so you shift the cost of the levy to homeowners at the benefit of ag land owners and cabin owners. So as we talked about this more, we talked about the idea of a capital project levy potentially going to the voters at some point in the next year or so, asking for approval for a dollar amount that would then be offset by the savings in the refunding on your debt service payments. And so, in other words, asking, if you had to go and ask the voters for $200,000 a year, it's easier to ask for them if you say, well, at the same time, we're going to reduce your taxes by some number, $175,000, $200,000. And depending on when you wanted to do that sort of an ask, we can structure the refunding savings in a way that would keep taxes level. And we can talk about that in a second. But on the chart here then is a estimate for savings of about $175,000, which is roughly what we have on the current refunding, and a capital project levy of $200,000. So if you were doing this at the same time, you could tell your voters, look, we just saved a couple $1 million. We'd like you to help us invest in schools. We're going to apply some of that, or we're going to apply that savings towards some additional revenue that we need. And if you own a $150,000 house, it's going to cost you $5 a year if you vote yes. So, it's a way of obviously leveraging the savings so that you can ask your taxpayers for additional funds while helping minimize the tax impact of them. And what I meant by timing is that this example is run using taxes payable 2022, which is next year. So that's the first year that levies are reduced due to the refunding, but it would require you to hold an election in November to pass a capital project levy and get that added to the levy for taxes payable 2022. So just as a note, it doesn't have to be this November, but before we do the refunding, we'll want to, if you do want to move ahead with this kind of a plan, we want to know when you would intend to ask the voters. So for example, if you decided to move ahead with this and we're going to hold an election in February of 2022, it would be too late and taxes would go down by 200 or 175,000 for 21. And the February 22 election would put the first levy for the capital project levy on for taxes payable 23. So you'd have a reduction of 175,000, and then the next year an increase of $200,000. And there's a pretty decent chance no one will show up to say thank you for saving 175,000, but they might come complain if you raise taxes by 200,000. So to avoid that, we want to make sure we time the savings in a way that reflects what your future plans might be. And there's an easy way to do that. The examples we've run on the refinancing just show level savings over the life of the bond. If you said we want to hold an election in the summer or in the calendar year 22, so we don't want to reduce taxes in pay 22 until we see if that passes, we could add $175,000 of principal to that first payment on the new bond, so there wouldn't be any savings. And the levy would be exactly the same as what it is now. And the savings would start for taxes payable in 2023. And that would line up then with if you waited until calendar year 2022 to hold an election to ask for additional funds through this mechanism. But that also impacts when you receive revenue. So if you vote in this fall of 21, it'll go on the pay 22 levy and it will be revenue for the 22-23 school year. If you vote next calendar year, you wouldn't be able to get it on the levy until 2023. So it wouldn't be revenue until the 23-24 school year. So keep that in mind too, as you think about your budget. So it's what, do we need additional resources? If we do, when do we need them by? Or when would it be most helpful? And we'll use that decision to guide the strategy on the structuring of the savings from a potential refinancing.
So this capital project levy would be, okay, so it'd be $200,000 per year, effectively perpetually. Is that correct?
I'm sorry, yeah, no, I should have noted that the kind of like an operating referendum, the state limits it to 10 years at the most, but then you can obviously renew it at the same rate with a ballot question that says, by voting yes, you're voting to extend a levy that was set to expire. So renewals tend to have a pretty high passage rate.
Okay.
And the other thing is I should mention is that the capital project levy is it's not set as a dollar amount or dollar amount per pupil. It's actually set as a tax rate. So you'd basically be setting a ballot question that had a tax rate that would generate, in this example, $200,000. So if your tax base goes up, you could generate more than 200,000. If it goes down, you might generate less than 200,000. And 200,000 is just an example we used after talking a little bit with Jeff and Crystal, but obviously if it was 175, it would show zeros for tax impact all the way down. And it's pretty proportionate. So every $25,000 you adds the tax impact again on the column on the right. So if you wanted 225,000, for example, that $150,000 home tax impact would be $10 instead of $5.
And based on the name, and I think you even mentioned it, so it'd be for something to do with capital projects. So it'd be buildings, that sort of thing.
Yep, buildings, technology, and it can also be used for technology staff. And so, frankly, when a district wants to go this route and they really need flexibility across their general fund, what might happen is, say you have $100,000 of salary expenses for technology staff already that you're paying out of your general fund. A district might pass this and designate 100,000 of those expenses to come out of the capital project levy, which frees up 100,000 of more flexible funds that are currently in your general fund. So it doesn't necessarily always result in this much new spending. It can be used to offset current expenses, which would generate new resources in more broader funding categories. Any other questions just specifically about the capital project levy? One thing I will note is that on the ag land, it's not quite the same proportion as the homes and commercial, because currently on the debt, the ag land qualifies for the ag to school credit. And so they're paying less now per dollar or whatever, however you want to describe it, than homes and businesses because of the credit. And then when it goes on the capital project levy, it does not qualify for the credit. And so the full amount is then paid by the landowner.
So I'm hearing that it's going to be hard to sell the farm community on this, harder than it is going to be to sell the residential community.
Jeff, can you repeat that? I couldn't hear.
I just was musing back here, but it's going to be harder to sell the farm community than the residential community. And that was sort of a comment more than a question. And then secondly, it really does make sense to sort of have this overlap with the refunding program as opposed to try to go independently. I mean, if we talked about doing it in November, we'd really want to be certain that we were refunding that bond, correct?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's pretty a high level of certainty that you will refinance it. But you need to, if you decide to vote this November, and we've shared a timeline with Jeff and Crystal, you need to make that decision by mid-August. And so that will inform what we do on the refunding too.
So I have a question about that. If we would choose to go to the polls this November, is there an election in Lake Woods County? There must be a state election. Is there something, or would we have to have a special school election?
Can you repeat that, Jeff?
She's asking if we went forward with this, with the November election, would that be a special school election for Lake Woods County?
Yeah, typically it would. So you would have the cost, you would bear the cost of holding that election, and you could check with your county for a little more information on what the cost might be. Obviously election judges and all of those related items, and ballot printing.
Okay.
And do you have school board elections in 22 or not?
Yes.
Yes.
3 of them.
Because obviously then November of 22, you could piggyback it with that, but if that's the only election, then you're bearing those costs as well. I guess you'd have them once instead of twice then. But then your other options for voting are the second Tuesday in February, April, May, and August. And it's likely that even next year, you would bear the cost on any of those days because it would probably be a school election only.
And the risk, of course, would be as if interest rates rise, and then that would undo some of the plan.
Yeah, it would make that tax impact shift look different. Yep.
But if we made that payment for that $175,000 that first year, then we could add that, then we could add that to the debt, and then the tax repercussions would be the same as if we had refinanced next year. Did I understand that correctly?
To wait a year and time it?
Yeah, if we
Yeah.
did that first payment, that 170 in savings.
Yeah, we have the ability to structure the payments on the new bond really however we want. And typically in a refunding, if there isn't a plan to do anything else, it's just level savings over the life of the bond. In this case, we would add $175,000 to the lower payment, to the reduced payment, so that there wouldn't be any savings for taxes payable in 22 if you intended to potentially hold a vote in
That
calendar.
would make the impact the same.
Yeah, and then you'd be taking $175,000 of future payments from the last 14 years. So you'd save an extra $10,000 or so every year for the remainder of those years.
But then that would make the impact of the tax change happening at the same time, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't know, is there an advantage in having something passed to have a special election versus doing it in a general election year? I don't know that either.
Well, typically the lowest passage rates for school referendum operating requests, capital or operating referendum requests, the lowest passage rate is typically in November of a presidential election year. And then the next lowest is typically November of a gubernatorial election, which would be 2022 election date. So if you just look at November as the best years in November are the odd years, but then you typically the only jurisdiction that are holding elections, and you bear the costs of that. So 21 or 23 would have a higher passage rate. Now, if you get off of November, the year doesn't typically matter as much. If you're voting in February, May, April, or August matters a little if there's a statewide primary. Sometimes that has an impact.
I guess the answer would be to find out how much a special election would cost the school and measure that, you know. So.
Yep.
Yeah, I just messaged Eric at the courthouse and just asked him if he was aware if there would be any kind of general election this fall, and he said he didn't think there would be unless a special election of some kind pops up. So nothing that is on that he's aware of at this time.
Nothing in the normal plan.
Yeah.
And looking at the timelines too, we've already missed some of the deadlines for the earlier ones, so it would either be August or November.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry, what was that? I just heard timeline, but
Danny was just saying that if we wanted to go prior to, how did you say that again? We missed some of the deadlines as
Like calling the election.
for calling an election earlier. And I think the timeline you sent me would be an August 10th or November 2nd.
correct. And by then, by August, we'll have a good sense of where rates are at. So if you did decide to move ahead this fall, we'd have a good sense of how to help you build the plan and the discussion with your public. You could also call for the refunding in August and call for the election at the same time and talk about them in the same, context together. And then you'd have the results when we sell the bonds in October. We'd have the locked in rates and the results of the savings for your taxpayers that you could share in the last 2 or 3 weeks before the election, the vote actually took place.
So the discussion here is that our first step right now would be to look at what the cost of a special election would be. And knowing that they can decide if they want to do it on an off time.
To me, there's not a question of whether we should refinance,
Yeah.
yes. And, the other option would be that 175 to delay that and then do it, but what's the advantage and disadvantage of 21 or 22?
Okay.
Decide that.
So I don't know if you could hear that, but they're just, Lynn was just mentioning that it seems like I'll put words in her mouth, a no-brainer to do the refinance and then look at the cost of the special election and then kind of divvy out when does it make sense to do everything as far as a timeline. Anything else you want me to add?
Also, if there's a special election, I'm assuming it would be mail-in like all of the others. And I think you need to account for the time for that too, because so many people will get the ballot and take care of it well in advance of the election date.
Yeah, I think that's the absentee availability is
Which-
46.
Like, I think all of the county is mail-in except for the city limits, if I'm not mistaken.
So is that the same deadline as the absentee deadline to have those ballots available 46 days prior to the election?
I think so.
So early October or
No.
late September, probably, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
September 17th.
Was that on, is that on our timeline?
That came from my secretary right off the corner of my ear here. She's on top of things. So we have some research to do with the county as far as elections. I think we'll plan on doing something with the refinancing and then timing. You know, the board's got to decide if they want to move forward with the capital projects. I don't know if they have more specific questions on what that entails and if they want us to move forward with that. And then we'll probably be in more close contact with you, Greg, and Ellers, and kind of doing the timeline stuff and getting your assistance on running that levy vote if we go that direction.
Yep, okay, that sounds good. If anyone has any questions, just feel free to, let Jeff know and he can connect with us and get everybody answers back, so.
I have to ask you to do me one more favor there, Greg, unless you have something else to show. Can you make me the host again so I can make sure I shut things down right with the live feed?
You know where I do that?
Go to my box with my face on it and go to the three dots.
Make host. Yes, I do.
All right. Oh, it feels, I was out of control there. I had no control.
Yeah, I didn't know I had so much control. Wait, yeah. All right. Well, it's nice talking to you all, and we'll obviously we'll continue to be in touch and continue to give updates, and Jeff will pass those along as needed. But glad to see you all tonight, and happy to help however we can.
Well, thank you for your assistance and information on this. Appreciate it.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Take care.
everyone. Good night.